In this video, we'll cover the discussion of the characteristics of different creation stories or cosmogonies. Similar with the pantheons, these cosmogonies from different cultures have different elements and characteristics which can be classified into several types. Meanings, natures, and significance of cosmogonies. Every culture and tradition has its own creation story or cosmogony embedded on its traditional tales or its mythology and folklore. Creation myths tell us how things began. All cultures have creation myths. They are our primary myths, the first stage in what might be called the psychic life of the species. As cultures, we identify ourselves through the collective dreams we call creation myths or cosmogonies. Creation myths explain in the metaphorical terms our sense of who we are in the context of the world, and in so doing, they reveal our real priorities as well as our real prejudices. Our images of creation say a great deal about who we are. The initial ordering of the world through the cosmogonic myth serves as the primordial structure of culture and the articulation of the embryonic forms and styles of cultural life, out of which various and differing forms of culture emerge. The recollection and celebration of the myth enable the religious community to think of and participate in the fundamentally real time, space, and mode of orientation that enables them to define their cultural life in a specific manner. Why there exist creation stories or cosmogonies? Aside from a form of entertainment, creation stories served as primitive science for early people as they seek explanation of the existence. This search for one's origin source of the existence of things seemed to be one of the most common human nature. That is why every society and culture will have its own cosmogony or creation story. As such, most cosmogonies or creation stories are very much embedded with the cultural symbolism and traditions where they come from. A comparison of the world's creation myths reveals basic creation types. Commentators on these myths have categorized them in different ways from various perspectives. A categorization of creation myths that in effect absorbs anthropological, psychological, and religious approaches is outlined by religion scholar Charles Long in his now classic Alpha, the Myths of Creation. The ex nihilo creation. Interpretation of ex nihilo creation. Ex nihilo is Latin for from nothing. The term creation ex nihilo refers to God creating everything from nothing. In the beginning, the divine being created the heavens and earth. Prior to that moment, there was nothing. The divine being didn't make the universe from pre-existing building blocks. He started from scratch. This is probably the most common among all creation types since this is a creation type of Christian cosmogony. In order to interpret the universal dream that is behind the many ex nihilo creation myths, we need to ask ourselves how the myth speaks to us, what it means to us outside of the particular cultural context. The ex nihilo creation myth that is revealed by a comparison of all ex nihilo myths is a product of a significant element of the collective mind's product of our cross-cultural human experience. The omnipotent being. One of the most important elements of the ex nihilo creation is the existence of the omnipotent being, a being who holds the power all over creation. The supreme being containing the elements of all earlier deities is a spiritual or psychological version of the scientists' long for unified field theory to explain all of existence. As human beings, possibly alone and vulnerable in the universe, we long for a universal axis mundi, a center that gives us meaning and significance. The omnipotent being serves, as in the Christian tradition, the reason behind the life of all living things who gifted all creations the gift of life. The fact that our Father lacks a mate and is notably alone in many cases, especially those of the monotheist, suggests a source outside of the generative cycle of birth, life, and death, a source that is eternal and by so being provides some sort of immortality to his creation. One inevitable cycle in life is the cycle of life and death, which reminds human beings of the concept of mortality. Being the source of life, the all-powerful being controls this cycle, and thus dying would mean living with him in eternal life. The void. Another important element of the ex nihilo creation is the existence of the void itself, the state of nothingness where everything began. The Supreme Being typically exists in the void, a difficult concept for mortal humans to comprehend. Perhaps empty space is the closest we can come to a vision of nothingness. The ex nihilo creator creates from nothing, and nothing is a concept that negates time and space. If our Father existed and created in the void, he presents us with the vision of a possibility of making something out of nothing. More important, since the void is timeless and without boundaries, he presents us with the vision of eternity, possibly suggesting eternal life. The deity's awakening. The deity's awakening is the possibility of creating from within himself. It's a metaphor for our awakening into consciousness, into our possibilities as creators. The child is proud of his feces and bodily fluids. The products of the child's body are creative steps off on the way to more fully planned creative acts that mirror the planned creation of the creator deity. The deity also creates by word, thought, and touch. In so doing, he speaks to our sense of the crucial necessity of being creative. Humans are driven to create, to mirror the creator in thought, word, and touch. We imitate reality, imitate creation, imitate the creator. First in our thoughts, then in the various forms by which we make our thoughts and imaginings concrete. In most ex nihilo creation stories, there will always be an event where the supreme deity would reach to a point of realization. In the Christian or Catholic story of the Genesis, God realized that he is alone in the midst of nothingness, which led him to create other forms of life, including the human beings. The human creation. Once the creator has completed the realization of his consciously developed plan for the created world, he realizes that something is missing. An element of the creator himself is needed to give life to the creation. This is where we come in. The supreme deity is said to have created as a being in his image, the human to watch over his creation. Thus, in fact, establishing the fact that humans, the creators of the story, see the God as being like them. In this assumption, human injects the element of pride into creation and both undermine its perfection and provide it with the energy of life. There are actually different versions of how human beings are created in the ex nihilo creation stories. But with these differences, one common description is that human beings are created in the divine being's image and likeness, as what Genesis states. This is also how human beings inject element of pride in these cosmogonies, being the supreme being's most beautiful creation. The devil. So enters the devil figure, who personifies the sensuality, the roving imagination, the duality, the ambiguity, and the imperfections of humans, the qualities that are precisely the elements that characterize their greatest creative works. The devil infects the paradise of the Eternal One's creation and endows it with the possibility of new creative powers, and of course also with the power to destroy. Another important element of the ex nihilo cosmogonies is the existence of the devil. The devil comes in different forms which varies across cultures. In the events in Genesis where the devil takes the form of a snake, the devil is the embodiment of temptation for human beings to commit sin. The price we pay for these powers is death. death being a necessary component of the procreative process by which we participate in the life cycle and also part of the related process by which we make cities, objects of arts, and other creative forms that mirror our image of the original planned creation of the ex nihilo creator. The consequence of sin is death. In the Genesis story, Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden after succumbing into temptation. As they live outside of the paradise, God punished them, that they work for their food and living, and that they from then on participate in the cycle of life and death through procreation. The flood. But to our Father, all of this adds up not to the healthy development of his children into adulthood, individuality, and creativity, but to disobedience and corruption. The natural instinct of the defied patriarch is to punish the wrongdoers, those who defy him even as they imitate him in his creation. So comes the flood that will wipe the slate clean and provide the possibility of new creation. The waters are, of course, a model for the waters of birth, and the ark is the placenta of rebirth. Chosen representatives of an obedient humanity becomes the fetuses of that rebirth and will participate in a new creation, the success of which, of course, remains to be seen. The assumption of the obedient descendants of the chosen is that the supreme deity is still there controlling his creation. The myth of the flood destroying all of creation is a common story in many cultures, not only of those with ex nihilo creation story, but even those of other types of cosmogonies. This signals that this is a powerful symbol in every culture with varied interpretations, like the symbolism of the water of birth or of science cleansing of the sins of the world. Creation from chaos interpretation. The archetypal pattern that emerges from a comparison of creation from chaos myths is more in keeping with the scientific, or some would say realistic, understanding of creation than the pattern that is reflected in the ex nihilo or myth. The reader who feels uncomfortable with the concept of a creator deity who always existed can perhaps more easily accept the concept of a void that is really not a void at all, but a chaotic mass of potential, the Big Bang awaiting to happen. Such a concept is implicit in many aspects of human life as we actually experience it. This slide implies that in comparison with the ex nihilo creation type, and probably among the rest of the basic creation type, the creation from chaos is deemed to be much more believable in human perspective, as it actually reflects the scientific explanation human beings have in the creation of the cosmos, the Big Bang theory, which is based on the Hubble-Lemaître law in physical cosmology, which says that galaxies are moving away from the Earth at speeds proportional to their distance, which, in other words, means the farther they are, the fastest they are moving away from Earth. Coupled with this idea is the hypothesis that the movement was actually caused by a great explosion, which is where the name Big Bang was actually coined. First, under the creation from chaos interpretation is the theme from chaos to cosmos. A metaphor for major historical change in which old ways are perceived as disorderly or chaotic is replaced by a new order, or in psychological state represent the stage of pre-consciousness in which the potential for full consciousness or self-awareness already exists. Two perspectives presented here are the historical perspective and the psychological perspective. In the historical view, this idea may refer to the development or progress human beings experience over the course of time, as human beings continuously explore new ways to make their lives easier and to improve the quality of life, Old ways are abandoned. Some may even have been preserved for the sake of cultural heritage to pave the ways for newer and modern ways of living. The psychological perspective, on the other hand, refers to the stage of each person's life where one gradually gains his or her own understanding and knowledge through the process of maturation. Another example of the chaos to cosmos concept exists in the experience of the artist. Although some might see in the artist an analogy with the ex nihilo creator, it must also be recognized that the artist works not only in the void that is the canvas or the page, but in the chaos that is the world around us. The artist must make order out of that disorder. Without the already existing material that the artist did not create, art would be impossible. Ceremonies are another means by which we overcome the negative power of chaos, the power of disorder. In this slide, the analogy that chaos pertains to disorder and cosmos pertains to order was much more given emphasis. In the artistic perspective, it is true that an artist may also be similar to the ex nihilo supreme deity who produces creation from within himself, same as the idea that the artist is the source of his own creative works. However, an artist also undergoes a process of making a creation from the materials that he did not produce by himself. His canvas, his paint brushes, his paints, and other color materials. Individually, these materials were gathered by the artist in our chaotic world to produce his own piece of art, a process which also mimics the idea of creation from chaos, creating order represented by the artwork out of chaos represented by the artist's chaotic world. In scientific terms, this all makes perfect sense. The struggle between cosmos and chaos, significant information and entropy, is a fact of nature. Whatever is ordered or differentiated tends to go back to non-differentiation or disorder. This applies to the machines, bodies, the cosmos itself. So it is that in creation from chaos myths we find a duality in the created world, a very realistic conflict between order and the pull towards entropy. What in the myths becomes good and evil, light and dark, creator versus undermining force. This idea points to the perspective that nothing is eternally permanent in this world, whether natural or artificially produced. All natural creations, human beings, plants, animals, even the lands, bodies of water, and other cosmological elements undergo changes. All these things have their perceived state of disintegration. All have its ends. Same is true with all that is artificially made, which have much more definite time of deterioration, a time of their destruction. Another theme from creation from chaos is the concept of the primeval chaos. From another perspective, whatever form it takes, the primeval chaos can be seen as a feminine principle, whether the waters, a drop of milk, the primal mound, a mysteriously appearing birth sac, or most especially the cosmic egg, the source of creation in the creation from chaos myth is the undifferentiated mother. In the creation from chaos myth, the feminine egg definitely comes before the chicken. And furthermore, the cosmic egg contains all that is, all the opposites, male and female, good and evil. This concept of creation from chaos definitely gives primal importance to the feminine gender as the source of creation. Remember that there are actually groups of scholars which revere the female deity against the more dominant patriarchal perspective, as the female gender is characterized by the natural capacity to produce creation in the process of giving birth. Moreover, the concept of the cosmic egg, the most common form of chaos, may also be a symbol of the biological reproductive cell of the female gender. Another theme from creation from chaos is the concept of dualities. This existence of the dualities from the beginning make the humans of the creation from cosmos myth somehow less to blame for their shortcomings that the supposedly perfect beings formed in the image of the ex nihilo creator, who, mateless, skips the cosmic egg maternal stage of creation. So it is that in this type of myth that the emphasis is more on how cultures are stabilized in the face of the pull towards disorder, either by our cultural hero or direction from above, than on the punishment of evil. The creation from chaos myth is first and foremost a celebration of the human need to make creation conscious of itself by creating cosmos out of chaos in society and in the psyche, and in so doing accept the dualities as a reality and as potential for further creativity. In this representation of human beings, in contrast with the idea of humans as created in the image and likeness of the supreme deity in the ex nihilo creation, humans are subjected to imperfections. The emphasis is placed on how human beings struggle to form civilization out of these imperfections through gradually gaining self-consciousness and will to produce creation from chaos. This can be said to be a much more realistic representation of human life as it mirrors society's continuous journey towards a more progressive way of life, one that is easier, more modern, and thus more orderly form of life. The third basic type of creation is the world parent creation. World parent creation interpretation. If myths are cultural dreams, we naturally look for the symbolic meaning of such a phenomena as a conjoined primordial parents. The first thought that comes to mind in connection with this image is the positive ideal of unity, a kind of androgynous union of genders. The parents are one. We all strive for unity, for union with something or someone. Conjoined primordial parents. But union can also be ultimate entropy, the absence of differentiation necessary for creativity. In this mythical union of the world parents, the parents are concerned only with themselves, their act of union. The humans faced with the sexually joined first parents are placed in what is, at least among those influenced by the Freudian view, the psychologically disturbing and even dangerous position of the child observing the sexual act of parents, the so-called primal scene. The mixed reaction of the child in question is apt to be horror and misunderstanding, and most of all, a desire that the act terminate immediately. This idea pertains to the fact that creation may have come in pairs, in partners, also pinpointing the idea of duality. As human beings are created in pair, a male and a female, one cannot be complete without finding its destined pair. Being one with someone paves the way for humans to produce new creation in the process of producing an offspring, the ultimate creation of human beings. But this union is also not meant to be eternal, as this may not allow differentiation and creativity, which may have meant to be the act of child rearing. And in psychological perspective, particularly in the perspective of Freud, this union is something that is supposed to be terminated for the sake of proper child rearing. Another concept under world parent creation is the mythical offspring. The mythical offspring are between, being smothered and cramped in such a way as to make their lives useless. At some point, like their real-life counterparts, they long to be free altogether of the restriction of their parents, who all too often resist the differentiation, the development of individuality, and the experimentation necessary for creativity. The world parent mother in mythology is a nurturer, but she can also be a devourer. She is earth, and earth takes back in death what she gives. The father can be a protector, but he can also be a jealous destroyer and a dangerous adversary, as the desire to overcome the combination represented by the parents to escape the darkness of life between them is perfectly natural. This may mirror the process of maturation of a child into becoming his or her own person who is in the journey of establishing his own individuality, his own personality free from the shadows of the parents. This process is usually faced with resistance from parents, which serves as the symbolism behind the idea of the mythological offspring's escape from darkness. The highlight of the world parent creation is the theme of separation. The method of separation is of course of psychological and general cultural interest. In many myths, separation and consequent freedom from parental interference is sufficient. In other myths, more violent action, especially castration of the enemy father, appears to be necessary and supports an obvious Freudian interpretation. In the case of castration of the father, the myth seems to say to become creative, the offspring must delete the fertile powers of the dominating father, thus making him irrelevant as far as the Mother Earth is concerned. Earth can now be creative playground of the offsprings of the world parents. Or looking at the separation of or destruction of the world parents from another psychological perspective, it might be suggested that in order for the psyche, collective or individual, to develop, old ways must be revealed, confronted, and eliminated. In the psychological as well as religious development, we must die to the old ways and be born to the new. This interpretation leads to the same symbolism behind the mythological offspring as for him or her to develop and establish own identity, he or she must be freed from the influence of his or her parents, which most parents resist and become a struggle to the child that usually leads to destructive or violent separation not only of the child to the parents but also of the parents themselves. As to the psychological and religious perspective mentioned, separation pertains to the act of abandonment of the old ways, old practices, or old forms of living to pave the way to a new life or new form of living. Historically speaking, the death or separation of the world parents may also stand as a metaphor for a change in cultural perspective. Once the separation is achieved, the offspring proceed with their new creation. In the new space between the separated parents, light, usually in the person of a new sun god, appears. The sun is a new source of fertility, at least partially replacing the old earth mother, sky father fertility, and the light is associated with the cosmic and cultural order. In cultural perspective, the separation may symbolize a society's shift from the old ways of living or old religious beliefs into new ones. In the ancient times, this shift is particularly common due to territorial expansions and colonizations resulting to changes in cultural and religious beliefs and practices. Sacrifice is also a prominent theme under the world parent creation. It remains to be emphasized that at the base of any creative act, in art, in history, in psychological development, is the necessity of sacrifice. To find the light, we must separate or destroy the old authority, but it is the old authority itself, or its broken pieces, that will often serve as the material for new creation. We can free ourselves from the world of our conjoined parents, but their values are embedded in us in some way. The old Earth Father will become the sky of our world, the Mother, the Earth. The cosmos and our world will be made of them. Or if we destroy the monster type of world parent, we will use the pieces of its body to make the new world. In consonance with the act of separation is the idea of sacrifice. A separation stands for the abandonment of the old ways. Sacrifice symbolizes the decline of the old authority to give way to the new one. In the cultural and religious perspective, old practices are not necessarily forgotten, but loses their societal value and impact. Rather, they transform into fragments of heritage that forms a society's identity. Fourth basic creation type is the emergence creation. Emergence creation interpretation. The emergence myth is clearly derived from the phenomenon of birth. The people gestate in various forms within Mother Earth, are usually watched over by what is, in effect, a midwife goddess, and they struggle in stages to emerge from a hole in Mother Earth as the people, in a place that then becomes the de facto world center for those people. The fact that the Father God has at best a minor role in the emergence creation emphasizes the mother-based birth process itself. The Father God appears as the Son only when the creation process is complete, and even then it is usually the guiding goddess, now acting as a cultural hero, who directs the establishment of civilized life. The emergence process theme. The emergence myth very likely has ancient precedents. It would have been logical for early cultures to find creation metaphors in the familiar mammalian birth process, or perhaps from the plant death and rebirth process rather than in much more esoteric ex nihilo, creation from chaos, or world parent processes. In either the birthing act or the vegetation cycle, the feminine principle is necessarily dominant over the masculine, whose role in the pre-gestation period is somewhat distant and perhaps unclear. Even now, we naturally think of the Mother Earth rather than the Father Earth. This is because it is Earth, not sky, that appears to give birth to the elements of this world, as opposed to the cosmic elements of the universe. At this basic type of creation specifically focuses on the creation of human beings, it very much likely that this will also mirror the concepts of human birth process wherein the feminine gender is much more given emphasis as the source of the emergence of new creation. The origin. The underworld where the emergence myth begins then stands for us as a womb, a dark, wet place that contains the potential for life to come. The unformed or partially formed beings that dwell. The underworld is the cosmic egg of the emergence myth. The beings in the emergence womb long to become something more, as do the beings in the cosmic egg of the chaos myth. In this idea, the metaphor is very much straightforward as the lower world or underworld where emergence begins symbolizes a woman's womb. In psychological terms, the beings in the emergence underworld are expressions of the longing for consciousness, for full realization. When they finally reach the light to which the mother leads them, the created people are able to see and to make the connections on which society depends. Same with the previous creation types discussed, the emergence creation also comes to a point of self-awareness or self-consciousness, but with the very definite symbols of full realization, the idea of reaching the light after darkness. The people. People of the emergence creation myth, like those whose creation myths are of different sorts, celebrate their creation and attempts to keep the creative process alive in sacred ceremonies. The Sikh Navajo sits in the center of a sand painting representing through symbols the act of creation, and the shaman sings the creation myth. In this way, the Sikh person becomes a part of the creation process and will perhaps have a chance to begin again. For other people, certain dances are dances of creation that provide the same opportunity for renewal to the whole tribal body. The last of the basic creation type is the earth diver creation. The Earth Diver myth, in its various incarnations, can be interpreted in several ways. It reflects cultural struggles, a religious sense of basic duality in the world, and human experience, a struggle essentially between good and evil, and a psychological departure from a state of the unconscious or subconscious life to the level of full consciousness. Above all, the Earth Diver myth shares with the emergence myth the metaphor of birth. With various versions of Earth diver creation myths, its interpretation can also encompass various perspectives, which are also reflected and discussed in the other basic creation types. One prominent theme under Earth diver creation is the maiden. Typically, a maiden in that world becomes pregnant and falls or is thrown through a hole in the heavenly ground to the formless and dark world below. As a cultural dream, the myth seems to tell us that there is some sort of divine purpose behind our world and that it has to do with the creativity that is pregnancy and birth, and therefore death, a purpose that is foreign to the paradise of the sky where the cycles of life and existence do not exist. The representative of the creative cycle of our earthly experience is contained in the woman who falls from the sky. She is the first priestess of Mother Earth, the world we live in that is dominated by the life cycles. The essential nature of Mother Earth is that she gives birth and devours her progeny in never-ending process. A very unique aspect of the Earth diver creation myth is a maiden who have fallen from the sky, a mysterious yet divine entity which is perceived to be from an eternal realm which is not bound to mortality or the cycle of life and death. The woman who brings with her the mystery of conception or giving birth symbolizes the mystery behind the divine purpose of the existence of the world. The descent. Whether we see the dive as a metaphor for a necessary descent into the unconscious world in the search of consciousness, as a symbol of our purpose in the world to make creation conscious of itself, or as an essential religious truth that it is Mother Earth who is the source of all life, the dive is as treacherous as that of so many heroes who journey into the underworld in search of something lost. In many myths, divers lose their lives in the service of the creative act. They are the expendable activating seed of a new creation, and finally one of them succeeds in bringing up the sacred material of the mother, the clump of mud that stands in for the cosmic egg of the creation from chaos myth. In comparison with the world parent creation, the Earth diver creation myth also requires a sacrifice before the full actualization of self-consciousness, that is, the actual dive itself. This may be a symbolic idea that for human being to realize and fulfill one's mission in life, he must exert effort and indulge himself to the journey of finding despite the struggles. The birth metaphor continues as the mud is placed on the turtle's back. Someone touches it, activates it, and it begins to grow like a fetus until it is Earth, Turtle Island itself, the chaotic mother power made conscious and orderly. Plants and more animals, including the human variant, are created, that is, are born of the mother. Many cultures give importance to animals, which may have been the reason of their existence in many creation stories, particularly of the Earth diver myths. This may be attributed to the fact that hunting is the first source of food for human beings before people learned to produce crops, and that some animals, like the turtle, seem to be mysterious and eternal entities for the ancients for them to take part in shaping their cosmogonies. The twin motif. In the versions of the Earth diver myth that contain the twin motif, we have a meditation on the duality inherent in our experience of human life and existence itself. Things are born, they live, but then they die. The mother gives, but she also takes. One age gives way to another. Pain and conflict are an evident aspect of life. The two sides of the duality that pervade life are represented by the twin or by the conflict between the creator and his devil trickster assistant. The twins are both offspring of Mother Earth or her representative on Turtle Island, and the devil creator is related in some close way to the good creator. These conflicts between two forces are the conflicts that rage within us all, or as Charles Long suggests, they can be expressions of the old cultural conflict between the hunter-gatherer and the agricultural ways of life. The twin motif also reflects the aspect of duality in other basic creation types. This duality speaks of the very existence of opposites in reality. good and evil, light and darkness, life and death. These opposites may symbolize the balance that is necessary in the world.